Cool. I'm assuming available. Right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The criminal justice system aims to punish people, not circumstances. We think that people, in the case of murderers and attempted murderers, are the same people, the same criminals, with the same intent and the same retribution they deserve. I'm going to give 2 arguments in this speech. The first one is going to win the debate because it's significantly the most important, and the second one will just engage some annoying metrics that Ock might try and push that are irrelevant to this debate. The first and most important is principally why murderers are deserved to be punished the same as attempted murderers, because they are as bad as people and they deserve to get the same retribution. In my second point, I will show also why practically we are better suited to keep society safe on our side, although I really think this is the smaller difference in this debate. Before I get into the point, few quick points of setup for this debate. Crucially, what is attempted murder? Attempted murder isn't homicidal ideation, which all of us have sometimes on the highway when someone drives past us and we think we wish this person was dead. No, attempted murder is an action. It is not just a thought or a plan, both in how it is defined by the law, but also in the ability to prove it. Remember that criminal law has a burden of beyond reasonable doubt to prove it. We do not have any evidence of someone just planning or thinking something without an action taking place. This is why the likely case of how attempted murder looks like in the real world is someone has already taken an action in an attempt to kill and failed. For example, trying to shoot someone to kill, but eventually only injuring them. Or trying to shoot, but finding out that the gun is unloaded. Not a change of heart, because that would be planning without attempting, which is out of the debate, but rather a genuine intent. We also think that in the case that there is no genuine intent, you would be able to prove it in court under both sides of the debate and get accepted from. Clarifications on the setup. Awesome. Let's get to the points. Firstly, why is it that principally attempting murder is just the same as committing murder? Few observations here. 1, we punish people in the criminal justice system for things under their control, not for things not under their control. Quick intuition pops here. We do not punish people if someone jumps under their wheels while they drive when they did not commit reckless driving and had no way of preventing it just because the harm happened. We do not punish parents when their kids commit suicide because someone died, because it's not their fault and we don't think they have control of it. Similarly, when someone does a crime and there's a difference in the harm, we often also don't have a real difference in the punishment. For example, we do not think that there should be a difference in how we should punish a rape in the case of using rape drugs or not using them, even if the trauma on the victim might be different when they are conscious or unconscious. The reason for why we operate this way is very simple, because we think that it is immoral to punish actors for things out of their control, and we think that it is justified and required to punish people for things in their control. This is why when we kill someone, we do not punish the gun, but we punish the murderer, because that is the person who had the intent and the ability to control it. We only punish people for what they are able to control. We claim that the difference between murder and attempted murder is not one of a different action or intent or anything under your control. It is plainly a difference of moral luck. The only difference between someone who tried to murder and failed and someone who tried to murder and succeeded is their luck, their external circumstances. Whether the gun happened to be loaded or unloaded, whether they happened to hit the heart or just next to the heart, which was insufficient to kill. We think this is a person that is just as bad under both sides and therefore deserves the same punishment. And punishing them differently would simply be discriminatory punishment. We would also observe that this is the single biggest change that happens in the debate. We do not think there's a significant delta on questions such as deterrence, given that on both sides of the debate, the people who attempt murder and the people who murder intended the same result. Under both sides, they intended to commit a full murder. They did not expect to fail, they did not plan to fail, it was an accident accident that they failed, which is why they don't change anything about their planning or their calculus when they decide whether or not to attempt a murder based on the punishment. Practically, it changes nearly nothing. Principally, it changes everything. Luigi.
So, do you think it is harder to live with the consequence of attempted murder or the consequence of murder?
I think it does not matter, because I explained already that the consequences are not the question that should matter here. For example, think of it this way. What is harder, to live with the consequences of losing a parent who is the only breadwinner, or losing a parent who is one of two breadwinners? Probably losing a parent who is the only breadwinner is harder. Yet we don't think this changes greatly the question of how culpable you are in murder. We don't think the question of murder should matter depending on who you murder. This is also why we don't give a lesser punishment if you murder someone who's old and about to die in a few years than someone who is young. Nor do we punish you less if you murder someone who is unemployed and doesn't contribute to society than if you murder a doctor or a scientist. We think that consequences just do not matter for justice. But secondly, why do we think we also have safer society on our side? Crucially, we think that attempted murderers are at least as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than real murderers. There are a few reasons for this. One, attempted murderers wanted, intended, and went through the full action process of committing a murder. They bought the weapon, they planned the place of murder, they tracked the person that they want to kill. The desire and the planning is still in them, meaning that both the incentive to kill is something that they have, as well as having rationalized to themselves why to kill, how to kill, and going through the moral barriers, meaning that they are still dangerous for society. More so, they are often more dangerous for society, given that their wanted victim is still alive. Someone who tried to kill his wife because she cheated on him will be more dangerous if she's still alive, and once they get free of prison, they want to still get vengeance because they didn't complete the job. We think that to protect victims, we need to keep these dangerous people behind bars, at least as long as we would someone who actually succeeded already. Beg you to propose.
Hello. There you go. Are we good? I mean, it's not like it Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Justice is not just an ideal. It is intrinsically linked to the material, real world. Consequences must matter for the justice system to be a real, functional institution. That's what we defend today in opening opposition, and that's why we're so proud to oppose. 3 things in this speech. First, we're going to do some direct refutation that will also construct why we can punish circumstances. Secondly, I'm going to talk about what justice is and what it should be. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about why you create a more punitive system and why you make it worse for the victim. Let's go. First, direct refutation. Hadar says we punish people, not circumstances. 3 responses. Number 1, attempting but failing often or sometimes reflects a material difference in the person. That is, you failing may reflect a subconscious desire to not have murdered the person. That your regret over killing this person means you shifted your aim at the last second. That you failed to properly poison them because you in your heart did not know. So it can in fact reflect a material difference. Just because sometimes it doesn't mean we can cast that judgment immediately. Attempted murder is not murder, and that's why we have the right to at least look into who this person is. Secondly, this is a logically incoherent position to hold. That is, we do punish people on the basis of moral law because people are formed on the basis of moral law. All your circumstances from when you were born up until the day you die are ultimately a product of moral law. Why do you have a temperament for murder? Why do you have a temperament for gambling or addiction? Because you were born that way. That is a product of moral law. At some point we have to make a decision. And I am fine making that decision if it means actual murderers are tried and treated with the seriousness and gravity they deserve, and people who did not commit that murder are not treated with that same seriousness. Thirdly and finally is that we can punish for circumstances. To directly refute this, we in fact do, in many cases. We punish people and we give people special consideration for economic circumstances. When they steal out of poverty, we give people consideration for mental breakdowns, which are circumstances that are out of your control, and you may have intended to murder them at the time, but you randomly had a mental breakdown that caused you to just be really bad at murdering. That's still something we can punish you for. So all these responses show we in fact can punish people, not circumstances. And even if we did, we can punish circumstances. Secondly, Hadar also says attempted murders are more dangerous because their intended victim is still alive. Ultimately, I will just say we will put this person on parole. Okay, argument one. What is justice? Let's try to construct justice from the ground up because it's really ultimately hard, right? Like, justice is so airy-fairy. It's an ideal that we have very little understanding of in the real world. Justice is just ultimately what feels good in your chest sometimes. It's what feels vindictive. It's what fulfills that deep, dark desire in your heart for revenge or for justice. And as a society, we have to understand that regardless of all these things, justice is intrinsically linked to consequence. It is intrinsically linked to what you do in the real world because the person behind that justice, that act, is unobservable. There is no such thing as a material person behind with which you can punish them. Only the material circumstances upon which you can make that judgment. And we make the basic observation that by divorcing this, you remove and deprive justice of its most basic foundation, which is we punish people for when they do bad things. And this is just less of a bad thing. Attempted murder is not as bad as murder because this person is still alive. They are free to roam the earth and it is just not as bad. I know I make myself look bad here by defending attempted murderers, but it's just not as bad. It is just not as evil to have done this and to have failed than to deprive the world of a loving child, to deprive the world of a father, to deprive the world of a mother and a good friend. This is a crime of a different gravity and deserves to be punished on different gravity. At the level of principle, we agree this is the most important contribution in the round. And what they have failed to show us is what maybe the person is different. We don't just punish people, we punish the crimes that they do. Of course, we're not going to lock up a gun, but we have to punish the person that did the crime. And in fact, we punish that crime because it has different gravity. So this is the first argument. This is justice. The face of justice is inextricably tied to material reality, and we make that material reality a better place by adopting it to what is actually worse and higher gravity. Yes?
Would you punish lesser a murderer of someone who has no family because there is less suffering to their family? Or do you still think it is equally evil?
Yes, I would. I would feel sympathy for a father that has been deprived of their child. I would feel sympathy that you have not just condemned this person's wife, you've condemned their children, you've condemned their workmates. I think it's fine to acknowledge the circumstances of their reality. That sometimes we have to make do because that is the reality we face. Second argument. You create a more punitive system of justice. This might sound a bit funny, but the first problem is that you fill up prisons more. And that is a procedural crime. That is a crime done to people that is unjust who were innocent in that situation. The basic logic is this. There are far more attempted murders than there are actual murders because people are pretty bad at murdering. I don't really want to give structural reasons for this, but like, one, you feel really bad. Two, it's pretty easy to get caught when you're trying to do murder and you get caught. Like, there are so many structural reasons, it's not real debated. The real thing is that when you put more and more people in prisons, you make life not just worse for that one person you put in prison for longer, but you make things worse for everybody in that prison. You stretch thin an already deprived pool of resources. You cramp up their prison cells. You make it harder for them to get out, which means you worsen conditions for an already exceedingly vulnerable group of people. Even if it's fine to increase justice for this one victim, you make justice worse by creating an entirely new class of victims in this crime. And in addition to this, it's not just inside prison, but that the longer they spend in prison, the harder it is to adjust when they get out. The worse recidivism gets, because the longer they've been in there, the harder it is to get a job, the harder it is to get a home, the harder it is to look your family in the eyes because you miss your child's graduation, you miss your child's getting their first job or their PhD or whatever. The longer they spend in there, the additional marginal years mean something because you increasingly deprive people for a crime they did not commit. Third argument, this is worse for victims. Why is this worse for victims? Imagine, not only do you have to live with the tragedy of surviving a murder, you also have to live with killing another person. Two, not just condemn them to prison, but to condemn the victim to live with the knowledge that after reporting this person, you've also screwed their child. You've also made things worse for their wife. And not only do you impose trauma on them, you make it harder for them to report, harder for them to come out about these crimes. That's why even if we have that deep, dark inclination to give the death penalty to every every worst person in the world, to every pedophile, to every rapist, to every bad person. We don't, because we understand that the material conditions of that reality will make it incredibly hard to report, incredibly hard to bring this person to justice, especially if the attempted murderer is someone that was close to you. So not only do you, in fact, in many cases, make justice worse, in many cases, you prevent the carriage of justice at all. And that's why, ultimately, justice must be linked to reality, not just for the victim, not just for society, not just for the murderer, but for all of us. Thank you.
Disclaimer, out of the 4 people, I am the only one who did not make it to the world's finals. Please All right. This debate, first and foremost, is what the state should be compelled to do. And honestly, letting attempted murders punish less is a gross negligence from the state for not acknowledging the dangers this attempted murderers pose to society and also the emotional and physical trauma they cause to victims. It doesn't matter if they have a change of heart. That implies, hey, they can be good at a certain point in time. But that's not the point, because the point is the fact that they thought about it, and the fact that they planned it, and the fact they tried to carry it out no matter what. That means that the threat is real, and the fact that some people are constantly traumatized, both emotionally and physically, are also real. And that's why we believe that who are we to judge? Just because you still live means that your harm is not as big as the fact that you die. We never know how people are going to survive with the trauma that they're going to face because of the attempted murder. So that's why we say that it's the state's obligation to make sure that these people are protected and the dangers that these attempted murders pose to society are also neutralized at all costs. Analogy is simple. When Imelda Marcos profited off Ferdinand Marcos' corruption, she's equally liable, even though she did not do the corruption herself, right? In an attempted murder case, you're probably lucky these people did not die, or you're just a lousy criminal for not allowing your plans to come into motion, but that does not eliminate your threat or the fact that you hurt people in ways you would never imagine, no matter they die or not. So I want to offer into concepts like, let's say, economic reasons why people commit thefts or something like that, or mental breakdowns or things like that. These are examples, but they do not necessarily respond to the logic that Hadar mentioned in her speech, which means that in that case, they need to do better. And we also believe that in that case, we're happy to oppose this type of instances as well in a different debate, which means that this does not negate the fact that attempted murders do pose significant harm to society. But here's the thing. Most poor people are successful to refrain themselves from actually committing thefts or committing any forms of criminal action. Which means that in that regard, it is very important to also acknowledge the fact that these people have complete agency to not do those things, but the fact that some people plan to do it, and it doesn't matter if they fail or not, they still try to do it anyway, which is why they're different in nature in terms of not different in terms of attempted murder or murder. What I'm trying to say that, in that case, some people who are not planning to do it should be rewarded, and some people who plan to do it should be punished the same way. But before that, David.
I'm just saying, I think it's a good idea to give people the incentive to screw it up last minute. As opposed to like, well, I'm already here, I might as well do it, right?
Here's the thing, you're not giving them incentive. The reason that why they have a change of heart is completely arbitrary. You never know whether they truly have a change of heart or not. You never know whether or not they are incentivized to not do it just because of the existence of this law. They could literally not be successful in doing it because they just have a lousy plan, that's it. But that's not negate the fact that they have the weapons ready, that they have the time, they have like the stalking all done and all those things, right? So rebuttal to David, when he mentioned that consequence should matter in giving out punishment. This is very disingenuous because we cannot quantify which fate is better. Some people say that, well, at least you did not die. We say that's also the reason that why that a lot of people become so unempathetic, because a lot of people would rather die rather than having to go through the trauma and rather than going through all of this physical trauma as well that they are going through because they were not killed, but rather was just barely enough to go through all of this. That's why we say that consequence in this regard does not matter, because in that regard, what they try to do in order to reach the consequence should matter more. Then David said, we are not okay with depriving the right of people from, let's say, the rights to have families, the rights to have all of their parents or things like that. This is also very flimsy. Regardless, they're going to be punished, which means that you're still going to take some dads away from their families or children anyway. So we don't understand the substantial harm of this. But the reason that why this is particularly important, because crucially, that same father is also the one who tried to do all of this crime, which means that in that regard, they are not deserving of their family to a certain extent, because they were so ready to inflict harm to other people. That's why we think that this right should not outweigh the fact that they try to pose some real threat to society. And there's also an off-flash argument about why then prisons will be overpopulated. We think that in that regard, there was a case in the past where we did not criminalize marital rape yet, because in that regard, that almost every husband in India, for example, will be put in jail. But in that regard, the reason that why we changed this law is because those things are inherently insidious, and therefore we are happy to punish them all the same. But I want to be clear on my extension on why the act itself, whether successful or not, is similar in nature. Why do criminals commit crime? Because I don't think opposition did a great job in trying to characterize why people commit crime and why the change of heart is so easy to happen. There are three reasons why people commit crime. Number one, they simply have the opportunity to do so. They have been holding it for so long. They see it, they see a knife, and they stab you right there and then. Which means that in that case, opportunity allows you to do it. But opportunity will not come into fruition unless you think about it. The second reason that why people commit crime is because they're pressured to do it. They hate you. You put them under severe death, so that's why you think they think that it's better to kill you or to remove you from the earth or things like that. And thirdly, they self-rationalize or justify. Why is this better? The thing is, whether they succeed or not does not change the fact that they walked through the plan. They justify the decision. They failed because probably the plan did not work, or they hesitated, but still tried to do it. Obviously, in situations where the form of hesitation is the fact that they did not do anything, like when you try to do attempted murder, there are probably 10 steps that you need to do. I need to check where they are at this time. I need to check if my weapon is ready. I need to check if the place to dispose the body is also ready by the time. That means that there are multiple steps for them to do it. But here's the thing. If you are not doing any of them, that means you also do not have the evidence. So in this regard, probably that scenario is out of the debate. Which means that most instances, what is being discussed in this debate is when you're already doing some part of it, or when you're already, let's say, doing every step of the way, but that person did not die. This is very important. Why? Because in status quo, on their side, victims are placed in a most disadvantageous position. Because whenever they want to file a report or file a claim to the police, they are the ones who have to fulfill the burden, whether or not it's true that someone is trying to attempt the murder on them. Can they prove, let's say, can they provide proof or evidence that attempted murder is underway? This changes on our side. And we think this is unfair, because when someone is being attempted to be murdered, their state of mind is not always in the right place to be able to provide all of these things. And we just think it's completely unfair to push them and to put them in that scenario, in that position, where they are the ones who need to make sure and to prove that there is indeed some attempted murder going on. This changes on our side. We need to make sure that victims are protected first, and retribution comes into first as well. Which means that in that regard, we're able to pressure perpetrators to not even do all of these things altogether, because eventually they can be punished. And this is very important. Why? Because in that regard, victims are the ones that we need to protect the most in this case. And we believe that their side is not doing the job. We need an explicit weighing from their side. Why then, let's say, the right to give them families or give them the fathers should outweigh the fact that they do pose real threat to the victims. And because of that, we probably propose.
No, 100%. All good. Woo! No, this is okay. I'm all good. Alright, hello everyone. My name is Luigi. I'm going to start my speech. Alright, I'm ready. Hyping myself up. Let's go. We got this team. States were not made to facilitate the revenge of the dead. They were made to fulfill the wishes of the living and to make for a better world, to make for a better future, to make for better wars. And so I ask you the question, what does it mean to be Andy? What does it mean to be Buzz Lightyear? to reduce the complex nature of the human person and human intent, like the way opening government does in this debate, is to merely create a human of one of toys and games and to make a false toy story. My argument in this speech will be twofold. Number one, I will ask you the question of why does planning not matter? Or in other words, why does redemption for the empire matter? And number two, I will ask you the question of why does death make a meaningful difference in this debate? And why do we care if people die or not in the real world? Because heaven exists. Number one, on planning. The previous speaker makes the false assumption that says, oh no, if people make false plans, we should still consider them evil. We should still punish them because they planned it, they are bad, they created this plan. Never mind that the consequences and the circumstances and the capacity to be able to execute those plans might create the circumstances that are flawed in those people. Never mind that the state was also complicit in the birth, and heaven and God was also consistent in making it hard for people to, be small and kill someone that is tall. Why would you say that David is just as evil as Goliath when Goliath had the power to be able to kill those same people in the same way? But when David is lucky to throw that rock at the Goliath, suddenly you say that the exacerbation of power means that he is more evil in some way or the same evil as other people in this world. I say that is not the case. When the Death Star plans were leaked, the Rebel Alliance was better able to counter against the tyranny of the Empire. And we uncovered that a state that had this ability to create so much evil, was also one that balanced against the evil of the Jedi Order too. And we say that flawed plans are indicative of the ability of the human soul to redeem itself, to change, to become better. That we are not the same people that the state says, that because you attempted and you failed, because you tried and did not succeed, that you are the same scum as every other individual that has lived that pain, that cannot speak for themselves, that the same victims that the state assumes, that always want the same revenge, always apply consistency to the same individual every single time. When victims can finally speak them for themselves, if you really want to represent victims, allow them to have a counterbalancing mechanism against the state. It is only when you say that you do not punish murder the same way that you do attempted murder or vice versa. And we acknowledge that yes, it might sometimes be unfair that murder is punished the way that it does. That's only because we make the assumption that heaven doesn't exist, that death is the same worst thing for every single individual, that some people don't go to heaven or hell. Like, I would be happy to not punish people if I knew that the person go to hell anyway, because it doesn't matter, right? Because you already know that death is meaningless, that people die. But that's not how states operate. States operate with the assumption that people now change, they are able to become better people, they live with the understanding that their own victims, that their own flaws are most visceral in front of their minds, that the biggest failure was the fact that I did not kill someone, but that is also the biggest success too. It is only when states can be redemptive, can actually finally redeem people and allow people the chance to save themselves by making prisons safer, by making prisons more accommodating, by making courts more representative of those same people. That is when we know that we're not part of the dark side. Go.
If my child commits suicide and objecting harming the world also happened, it is just not my fault because it is not in my control. In the case of murder, yes, an objecting harming the world that is maybe worse than attempted murder happened, but not because of any action in the control of the murderer.
The Death Star that killed hundreds and thousands of people. But you wouldn't say that those plans necessitated our ability to say that those same people, the stormtrooper that was recruited off of Jeddah, is the same person that we would say should have not had the chance to surrender their arms and change because of an ideology that they had no control over, that subjugated their entire life, made them someone that they were not, and suddenly transformed you just because a state says, another legal system, another Jedi Order says that this person cannot change. I will not succumb to this battle of examples if you say that the Death Star is evil only because it had the plans. Those plans were doomed to fail. They were doomed to fail because we could change the Death Star too. Why then does death make for a meaningful difference? I have now revealed and unpack this debate to be one of the game. The key contention of this debate is whether death matters. Because government, as we have structurally proven in our speeches, specifically in David's second minute at the 32nd point, it always tends towards the highest punishment because they assume that death is always the worst thing in this earth. When living with your own sentiments and living with your own failure is always worse, or sometimes even worse in these instances. The victimhood of surviving the Death Star is the best counterbalance against the absolute revenge of the state for the following reasons. Number one, because the changes in a person are mediated through the facilitation of the state. The state democratizes the law. It democratizes the punishment. It facilitates public will. But when public will is absent the ability of victims to speak for themselves, when the state assumes what victims want, because they are dead, because there is nothing else to matter in this life other than life itself, because you are like eliminating life because someone is dead because of murder, because that's what happens when 1 minus 0 becomes 0 in death. What we say is that the facilitation of guilt, regret, and pain in the court system is always done when states are best able to know that death is not the only absolute thing that must be considered in the justice system. That attempts, whether it be luck, whether it be because of the Death Star, or whether it be because of circumstances outside of your control, those same circumstances, your same mind, are a product of many things that you yourself had no control over. And when we have nothing else but ourselves to live in this life, and that regret, our own mind, our own pain, our own life, there's no way you can say that someone else's life, because they are gone, must mediate everything I must do in this life. And that is where states must defer this pain and spread this pain in a way that allows people to heal. And it can only happen in our world. So, I urge you, stay with the force.